9999, a well-known and fond memory for North American fans of Sega, as it would mark the maiden voyage of its latest and final console, a successor to the short-lived Sega Saturn and the first of the 6th generation of consoles, the Sega Dreamcast. A pioneer in many ways in regards to online gameplay, a siphon for dial-up internet bills, and a console that was laden with a host of excellent first-party titles. Now, being from Europe, we didn't get the Dreamcast till a month later, in October, but being 7 years old and none the wiser on the wider gaming sphere, I was content in my small Nintendo bubble for the first 3 years of my gaming life. Since my parents had split up when I was young, it was a normal thing for me to spend the weekdays with my father for school and then go to my mother's on the weekends. At my dad's, I had an N64, and at my mum's, I also had an N64. And of course, for a young boy, having a console all your own was the shit. So if you had two, you were double the shit. However, one day I returned for a weekend at my mum's, went upstairs, and what greeted me was not my N64 anymore, but something else, a small white box with the strangest controller I had seen yet, not to mention this odd Game Boy shaped periphery that was apparently a memory card and slotted straight into the controller itself. My stepdad walked over to me, told me that they had bought me a Dreamcast, and handed me 3 games: Soul Calibur, an excellent title, Sonic Adventure, an excellent title, and Echo the Dolphin, Defender of the Future, a title. This started to broaden my horizons at an early age. I was aware of consoles like the first PlayStation, but never had I seen something as advanced as this. And while my N64 was one reason why I fell in love with gaming, the Dreamcast was why I fell in love with Sega. Over the years, that small collection of games grew, until I had a surprisingly large choice to peruse over. Fur Fighters, Jet Set Radio, Power Stone, Sonic Adventure 2, MDK2, they all ended up as my foundation for who I am now. Yet, there was one title that evaded me until now, one that released in the year 2000 and lauded as not only one of the greatest games on the Dreamcast, but one of the most beloved JRPGs of all time. And of course I'm talking about Skies of Arcadia, or in this case Skies of Arcadia Legends, that released on the GameCube 2 years later. Though I will say now that I used an emulator because I don't have the original hardware anymore. It's surreal holding this in my hands for the first time really. I mean, I found it at my local game store for 80 quid and I just nabbed it immediately because let's face it, in this day and age, that's a pretty good price for this game. But before we actually get into it, what is Skies of Arcadia? How did it actually come to be? Beginning as Project Ares in 1999, it eventually changed to Eternal Arcadia in 2000 for its Japanese release, and later Skies of Arcadia for the West. Its development was left the responsibility of Sega's internal development team, Overworks, which was a fusion of members from Team Andromeda who had worked on the critically acclaimed Panzer Dragoon Saga on the Saturn, and also a few members of the team that worked on the Phantasy Star franchise. Some of these members, like composer Yutaka Minobe, also had experiences in other Sega works, like their flagship Sonic the Hedgehog series, so for all intents, there was a wide berth of talent involved in the making of Skies of Arcadia, and as such a great deal of hope was attributed to it. With the minds of Phantasy Star and Panzer Dragoon behind it, along with a more powerful and simpler to work with platform in the Dreamcast, the intent was for Skies of Arcadia to be a rousing success. And development proceeded well, with many of the ideas of the team realised due to the capabilities afforded by the hardware. For instance, the team made a conscious effort to have transition between areas be seamless rather than separated by a loading screen, and there was a desire to make a huge world to explore inspired by the Age of Discovery from the 15th century. In particular though, they wanted the game to stand out from its JRPG contemporaries. Overworks felt that many games of the time like Final Fantasy VII and Koudelka were defined more by their dark undertones, accompanied by a cast that fit that mythos. In contrast, the team wanted to create a bright and cheery world which incentivized exploration, and also looked to their main characters to reflect that. By late 2000, it had finally released in Japan and North America, with the game coming to Europe about 6 months later. It would also later get a port to the GameCube in 2002 as Skies of Arcadia Legends, which featured added content and slightly improved graphics. It received critical acclaim from many outlets, with publications praising it for its presentation and fresh premise, and it's fair to say that many players felt the same, a legacy that has endured over 2 decades later. It wouldn't be a stretch to state that Skies of Arcadia in the present day is seen as one of the genre-defining JRPGs. Or, so I've heard. I've never had the chance to play it, so I'm just going off what others have said. But my amazing patrons did vote for this to be the next game on the Retro series, and I can't lie, I have been looking forward to actually firing it up for the first time. But I guess my biggest worry is, will it actually hold up as well as people say? I mean, it's been over 2 decades now. I'm not sure if... Is this one of the most memorable title screens of all time? They say that a picture says 1,000 words, and that certainly rings true for Skies of Arcadia. This title screen, soaring over the clouds as the logo slowly fades in with this beautiful rendition in the background, tells me everything I need to know about what this game is. This serenades me with the words adventure and exploration. The mythos and core experience of the game is laid bare within 15 seconds of starting it up. Now, upon starting the game, we're introduced to a sequence where a mysterious white-robed girl is attempting to escape the pursuit of an Imperial ship. She does get captured, but before the assailants can chart course back to home base, they are ambushed by the Blue Rogues, led by 2 of the game's protagonists, Weiss and Ica. Now, straight away, this sequence already gives me appreciation for the art style, at least for the characters themselves. These character models are expressive, vibrant, and well animated, but what really stands out to me is how recognisable it is. Sega of the early 2000s had this notable style for their characters, an approach that immediately flags into your mind when you see it. The proportions of the characters, the outfits they wear, their expressive faces, it reminded me a lot of another great game I played back on the GameCube called Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg. You just get that feel of naughty Sega when you see it. And that game, like Skies of Arcadia, is timeless in that regard. As was I impressed with the introduction to 2 of our protagonists, Weiss and Ica. Just as Overwork stated, they wanted these leads to be positive and extroverted, characters who aren't hampered by a loss of identity or a conflicting goal. Even from the off, you get a clear idea of what this duo is all about. They're gung-ho, they've got a strong set of morals tied to their group, the Blue Rogues, who are basically good pirates in this universe, and they also have great chemistry and camaraderie, a theme that is visited often as the game goes on. There's certainly more to say about the characters, but we'll revisit that later on. This ship functions as the first dungeon, but it's fairly simple and linear, though there is this cool mechanic of turning off the alarm to prevent further random encounters. At the end, we take out our first boss Antonio, or rather his pet, and it's not too difficult as the game is gradually easing you into its turn-based system. You get a max of 4 characters in your party, and each one has the ability to attack, cast spells, use special moves, guard or use items. The Skies of Arcadia also brings in a neat mechanic tied to the weapons themselves. By pressing the Y button you can change its elements, and this acts as a key mechanic for not only attacking, but defending. It's also improved further by the fact you can change items mid-combat, so for example if you're dealing with an enemy that hits you with a nasty status effect like stone, you can equip a character who can cure the party with a stone immunity accessory, and then that remedies the problem altogether. Or, since special moves can't miss in this game, you can equip a low accuracy weapon that has a trade-off of high damage, and then use that before attacking. I got a huge amount of joy in the early stages of equipping the mace hand to Drakmar and just pile driving with his tackle ability. And that's not all, as there's another neat mechanic in this idea of shared spirit points between the team. They are used for several things like spell usage and special moves. The idea is to balance your strategy around these spirit points, building them up for big bursts of damage while also making sure you have enough to defend yourself too. It also is worth noting that using items doesn't consume these points, so a key part of strategy comes in using items instead of your spells, as this will allow you to continue building your points at an efficient rate. More often than not, your spells are reserved for buffs and debuffs rather than attacking or healing. At the end of the battles, you get your standard fare in XP points and currency, but you also get points towards certain elemental classes. If you get enough points, you will unlock new skills tied to that elemental group, and you are free to do this in any way you want. One final note as well that I thought was a great addition was the change in music during boss battles. When the battle starts, it's a foreboding tune. It instills that sense of danger that you're facing down a formidable enemy, but as you gradually whittle down its health to around the halfway point, the music changes to this more upbeat and triumphant melody, indicating that you are in the ascendancy. With the girl rescued, who calls herself Fina, we return home to Pirate Island, which functions as our first explorable environment not tied to a dungeon. And it's a comforting zone, no stress, no danger. It reminded me of Outset Island from Wind Waker in many ways, the platform or beginning of what would later become a grand journey. That journey is not too far off either, as a moonstone, a source of power in Skies of Arcadia, crashes on the nearby land of Shrine Island. While Vice and Ica go off on their mission however to retrieve it, the Imperial Armada led by its General Galcian attacks Pirate Island and takes Fina and the crew of the Blue Rogues back to the Valoran Empire as prisoners. When they return, Vice and Ica make the decision to rescue the crew and set off. This is another key mechanic of Skies of Arcadia. Every now and then the player has a choice of options they can make, and if they make the right choice, it contributes positively to Vice's swashbuckler ranking. This ranking gives him progressively more positive titles as his reputation as a pirate grows, and will even affect how certain NPCs will interact with him, along with what side content can be taken on at the later stages. It's a cool idea, and really sells the idea of making an effect in this universe via your actions. Reputation and rumours are everything in the world of pirates, so it makes sense that it's replicated here. With the preparations made, the two set off to the Valoran Empire, but are struck off course by my personal nightmare fuel, a massive sky whale in a storm. I'm not gonna lie, that thing terrifies me. I think ReZero hit my psyche in a bad way. Anyway, it's not a problem as the duo are rescued by a grizzled sailor called Drakmar, who as luck would have it has been chasing the orca called Raknam for his own goals aboard his ship the Little Jack, though he won't share his reasoning at present. Drakmar is a bit cold as a person initially, but he does give control of the ship to Vice, who sets course for our next port of call, Sailor Island, in order to find a weapon to take out Moby Dick. Sailor Island is the first real hub we visit in the game. It's got a tavern, lighthouse, and a sailor's guild where you can report your discoveries and bounties. It also has some of these ethereal looking things called moonfish. The moonfish are one of the notable side objectives that you find all over the world. Using a contraption you get through story progression, an alert will buzz when you get near enough to catch one, and you can then take them to a side character called Doc, who is the current guardian of a girl called Maria and her pet bird. The bird eats the moonfish and then passes on rewards every time you do so, but at certain points will also transform, leading to a change in appearance. More notably, however, it also gives an added glimpse into the backgrounds of the characters involved. This is a recurring theme of Skies of Arcadia. A lot of the side content has added meaning that goes beyond simple rewards, as they'll often have small tidbits of lore ingrained into them. In the case of this Moonfish quest, there are several characters given a focus through this one sequence, including the game's main antagonist. Now normally, I am not a fan of this, and I would still prefer it if the full story for say, an important antagonist was given to the player over the course of the main story, but Skies of Arcadia does give enough information to at least make the antagonist's motivations clear, and the backstory is an added bonus tying into that motivation. It doesn't outright explain the motivation, but it gives a bit more to it, so I think that is fine overall. The one thing I am not a fan of though, is that handing in the moonfish has to be done one at a time, and the dialogue plays out exactly the same for each one. You hand it over, the bird eats it, Vice says it's getting bigger, Ica says something similar, it coughs up a reward, and you rinse and repeat. This whole sequence takes around 30 seconds with no way to skip it, so that's a small red mark for me. Eventually, Vice and Ica hear about the so-called harpoon cannon sold in Valor, which sounds like something that could be useful in the fight against Raknam, and use it as leverage to get Drakmar to take them there. For the record, I love this scene. It shows the ingenuity of these two when they're against the wall, bargaining as a pirate would do. After acquiring a passport, the crew arrive at the Valoan Empire, which does a great job at showing the scale of the enemy we're facing just through its military might alone. After a bit of sneaking, the team discover that the captured blue rogues are due to be executed, so they break in via the sewers and free them. Fina, however, is not here, as the Empress Feodora has commanded that she be taken to the inner stronghold, and we also get introduced to another important character, Enrique, the Crown Prince. As Vice and Ica give chase with Valoan soldiers in pursuit, it eventually ends in one of the best looking sequences in the game. Vice and Ica jump on top of the moving locomotive and run away from Galcian, who is proceeding menacingly towards them with the camera facing backwards, all while fighting enemies along the way. Skies of Arcadia has many moments like this throughout its story, but this one is such an important sequence for the trajectory of its narrative, on top of just looking very cool. It sets up the enemy, it drills home the threat of Galcian as an antagonist, it sets up the conflict between Valoa and the Blue Rogues, and it looks very impressive even in the present day. It got my adrenaline rushing just running away from this seemingly insurmountable foe. It reminded me a bit of my time back in World of Warcraft in the Halls of Reflection and running away from the Lich King in the final stretch. Another one of my fondest memories back from when I played MMOs. With a bit of endeavour, Vice and Ica manage to save Fina, who in turn are saved by the little Jack, which is now fitted with its brand new harpoon cannon. However, the escape is not yet complete, as the ship still needs to get out of the fortified entrance. This quickly transitions to yet another highlight of Skies of Arcadia, the ship battles. No pirate game is complete without fighting in a ship, and Skies of Arcadia has plenty of that. The turn-based approach is employed here as well, but instead, the ship's turn will be split into segments of mini-turns for each member of the crew. Those members can open fire, guard, cast spells and use items. Just like in the standard battles too, these actions are often tied to the spirit points gauge, with cannon fire costing a certain level of points and the same being true of spells. Those actions are then placed on a grid 4 squares long. The general idea is to shoot at certain event markers, while also defending yourself from the red squares, which indicate a heavy hitting blow from the enemy. Once the commands are put in, you watch the sequence play out and rinse and repeat till you win. A cool addition in these fights though comes in the choices you can make at certain rounds. Vice as the helmsman will be able to maneuver the ship to gain a potential advantage. For example, he can choose to close the enemy down and you'll get rewarded with a wider berth of opportunities to attack. It's a neat approach that presents the idea of a captain attempting to outwit the opponent. On top of that, much like the characters, the ship can be outfitted with equipment too, like guns, armour, propellers and so on. So you're not just outfitting your characters, you're outfitting your ship too, and it's a notable draw of the game overall. With the use of the harpoon cannon, Vice and the crew escape back to Pirate Island. Not really sure if that's the best place to go after angering the Empire, but okay. It's here where Fina shares her mission. She is part of the Silver Civilization and has been sent down to retrieve the so-called moon crystals. These crystals allow for the control of man-made weapons called Gigas, which were the focus of a war many years prior. This war was ended when a phenomenon known as the Rains of Destruction destroyed the warring peoples, though no one knows its cause. The Valoan Empire are on a quest to find these crystals as a way of asserting world domination, and that's why they were attempting to capture Fina earlier on. Vice and Ica state that they are more than happy to help her on her quest, and the core group of 3 for the rest of the journey has been brought together. It's around this point where the game starts to open up. Up until now, it's been mostly a case of moving from story point to story point, but now that the objective has been set to find the crystals, we're given more freedom in terms of where we want to go. A general direction is given to the player, but it's a chance to explore the skies at your own pace for the first time. As the name Skies of Arcadia suggests, it takes place in the skies, and as such there is no concrete landmass. Instead, there is a set of continents and islands that you move to via your ship. This was what Overworks were attempting to bring to the fore since the game's inception. They wanted to create a game with seemingly boundless potential and possibility, a world of wonder and mystery that you feel compelled to explore. And it really does hit that theme on the head. As said before, the idea was to replicate that feeling of the Age of Discovery from the 15th to 17th centuries, a period in history where seafarers sailed across the world and found new colonies and lands. Skies of Arcadia achieves this not only through the standard skyfaring travel, but also through the abundance of secrets in the world. There are hidden areas to find and discoveries to be made for those willing to comb every little area of the map. Such a large portion of my time was dedicated to just roaming the skies. I had little desire to continue the story right off the bat. I wanted to see what this world had to offer, and it rarely disappointed. Very few games are able to replicate the sense of freedom that Skies of Arcadia presents. I'd say there were only two things that hampered the experience, one being the navigation. The story is quite vague in where you should go next, but that wasn't my main problem. Rather, it came more in moving back to previously visited areas. You have a map and a compass, but there is no way to mark your destination on said map, so I found myself consistently rechecking that to ensure that I was on the right path. If I could say place a waypoint on the map, that would have been a neat quality of life addition. But it wouldn't have been an issue had it not been compounded further with the random encounter rate. It was a common complaint for the original game, and though the GameCube version curtailed this to a point, the rate was still a bit too high even with items dedicated to lowering that probability. The issue was that simply turning the ship to get your bearings and going up and down would still contribute to the potential of an encounter, so as soon as you moved say a couple of yards you would be hit with another fight. At the start it wasn't too bad, but it did start to grind me down a little bit later on for reasons we'll be discussing later. The team decide to make their way out to find the red moon crystal first, and land on Maramba, a town in a desert region. Much like the desert, they also get deserted by Drakmar, who wants to carry on his hunt for the whale. Stranded for the time being, the trio make their way to a bar where a dancer takes a shining to Vice, and vice versa. I get a kick out of Aika's face in this scene too. The chemistry of the group is already on full display less than 10 hours in.
Hey! Huh?
The dancer, called Belena, is aware of their need and offers her ship to get them to the temple where the crystal lies, that being a giant pyramid in the middle of the desert. And it has to be said, the set pieces in Skies of Arcadia are something to behold. Overworks did a solid job in selling the scale of some of these locales, whether it be mountaintops, pyramids or underwater temples. I've seen plenty of games mess up their sense of size, but Skies of Arcadia isn't one of those. For a title that came out over 2 decades ago, I was very impressed with what they were able to present here. As was I impressed with the dungeons. This one is a decent first impression of the experiences to come. It once again nails that scale, the ambience is on point, there's a fair number of divergent routes to find treasure, and the actual puzzles within them aren't too frustrating overall. They strike a decent balance between frequency and difficulty. In many ways, they gave me flashbacks of dungeons from the early 3D Zelda games or Rayman 2 for the Mask Temples, a very similar feeling, and that's never a bad thing considering how stellar those games were. Of course, there's a boss at the end of this one, a giant fireworm, and beating it allows us to take our first crystal. Belena is waiting for the group outside, but turns out she's a traitor called Belaza, and is merely there to take the crystal as one of the admirals of the Valoran fleet. With its power, she awakens the red Gigas, which we gotta take down. Drakmar makes a return during this point to help the blue rogues out. Now the Gigas fights are all ship-based, for obvious reasons, as these things are massive. But in the early stages, at least with the little Jack, we don't have the firepower to take them out one-on-one. As such, the initial fights are all about hitting a certain flag and then ending it in another way. In the case of the red Gigas, it's noted that hitting its head causes it to lose balance, so focusing fire on those turns before it attacks will allow us to at least survive. Realising eventually though that attacking the Gigas is futile, the team decide instead to turn their attention towards its controller, Belaza, and her flagship. I'm not sure if it was meant to be challenging doing these fights back to back, but it's simply a case of waiting for the harpoon cannon and taking her out. With that, we take our engine for a bit of added oomph to get through the treacherous South Sea and make our way to Ixataka to get the green crystal. Now one thing I have to add as we make our journey over to Ixataka is the strong pacing of the game's story. Up until this point, nothing has dragged, and I've had a lot of enjoyment from just exploring the world at my own pace, which is where the majority of my playtime was built. This point pretty much stands throughout the whole experience. Though it took me just under 39 hours to finish all said and done, there wasn't any moment where the game felt padded or that it was losing steam. I've no doubt that one reason for that was because of the excellent sequences the game often presents, like that train escape from back in Valor, and it just raised my anticipation of what I was going to see in the coming upcoming events. Now the South Sea itself is a stuff of nightmares, yet again very windy and giant tornadoes that can rip the ship in twine. With a bit of perseverance though, we get through to the Ixtacan region, and you know you're there because these leaves will be blustering in the wind. That's yet another great thing. For all intents, Skies of Arcadia is a grand journey across the known world, so it makes sense that different regions will have different climates and features. You had the sands of Nasir and now the green forests of Ixtaca. Nothing is static in this universe, there's always something new around the corner, and it remains one of the biggest strengths of Skies of Arcadia, even to its climax. We make our way to the forest village of Hortica, which is without question my favourite town in the game, purely because it has giant monkeys and wooden slides to get around. The chief of the village isn't too happy to see us, however, and is distrustful of the men from the east because they have imprisoned Ixtacans at the Moonstone Mountain. One such prisoner is a high priest who knows the location of the crystal, so that means Vice and the gang have to get involved. Now the Moonstone Mountain is the point where another notable issue started to rise. Skies of Arcadia came at a tough time for developers who were attempting to make that jump from 2D to 3D, and the pioneering days of that transition have certainly seen a few bumps here and there. One point of particular concern for many was the camera and how it controlled. Super Mario 64, for example, visibly showed a Lakitu with a camera to help players visualise the shift and approach. Even so, many franchises that made the jump to 3D did struggle initially, and Skies of Arcadia as a new IP still had a similar problem. The camera in this game is mostly okay, it follows Vice at a decent distance and is fairly easy to maneuver. However, when you start to go into say any sort of narrow hallway, it'll get stuck in walls, and since you're often backtracking in these areas, it becomes a chore to actually get it facing behind you again. It's not a massive issue, as of course there's no need for fast reflexes or the like, and I've played through games like this in the past, but even still, it has to be mentioned. We make our way to the mountain, take out Antonio's pet once again, just like in the opening sequence of the game, and rescue the priest who tells us where the temple that holds the crystal lies. This temple is super easy, though it again has some high points, in particular the awesome Aztec building near the end. This building also details the actions of a person from the past who assisted the Ixtacans, a person who wears the same attire as Fina. However, the group is stunned to find that the crystal is gone.
Oh no, wherever could it be?
It turns out that the Ixtacans have already taken the crystal in an effort to awaken the Green Gigas and use it as a weapon against Valor. This goes as well as you would think. The following fight is much like the Red Gigas. We have to use the harpoon cannon to push the Gigas into the nearby canyon, which isn't too difficult to do. With that behind us, the next port of call is the Yellow Crystal in Valor, which is stuck in the mountains. However, it's currently protected by a massive unbreakable seal, so the group find themselves at an impasse, but are soon attacked by Valoan patrols. On a side note, I found a so-called chom here, and I have no idea what its purpose is. Fina has a pet called Koopel to compensate for her lacking combat expertise, and during the game you can find chams to feed it. If you feed it enough of these, Koopel will evolve into ever stronger variants, so you don't actually buy weapons for Fina, you simply find materials to upgrade the same one. The chom, however, causes Koopel to get an upset stomach and puke out all of the chams he has eaten. I don't know if this is designed for some sort of completion flag, but I never saw what their purpose was, so if you know, please inform me. With the patrols beaten, one of them informs the group that not only are Valor planning an attack on Nasir, but also that Raknam is nearby. Drakmar makes the decision to haul anchor and wait for the beast to arrive, informing Vice of his motivations for hunting the creature. When he was a fisherman, Raknam killed not only his crew, but his son, and without any purpose in life beyond that, he resolved to kill the beast as an act of revenge. After a period of silence, the fog draws in, indicating that Raknam is close, and just hearing the cries of the whale mixed with the onset of the black clouds and lightning was a terrifying ambience overall. I was at the edge of my seat for this part. Eventually they find the whale, but are shot down by the pursuing Valoan fleet. Ica, Fina, and Vice escape on separate boats, while Drakmar stays behind in an attempt to finish the job. When Vice reawakens, he finds himself stranded on a deserted island. Now of course we've lost Drachma, but Skies of Arcadia has an interesting method to circumvent this when such an event occurs. The main gist is that Vice, Ica and Fina are the core protagonists. They're pretty much always together with the exception of this sequence coming up, but of course this leaves one spot open. This is where plot convenience comes in. When one person leaves, another will take their place soon after, and the same holds true here. Vice is soon picked up by a captain called Gilda, and you know he's a pirate because he has a parrot. He's a cool guy though, he just lives to party and pick up girls. In an effort to escape a love-struck maiden, he uses a lifeboat with Vice to escape to Nazrad, the Nasur capital. Unbeknownst to Vice, Ica and Fina are also here, as they were rescued by that love-struck maiden, Clara, and then dropped off at Nazrad too. Both of them now have the goal of finding each other, despite literally being in opposite rooms. Eventually, both decide the best course of action is to buy a ship, and the best way to do that is to get some money. There's words of a legendary treasure on a nearby island, so both parties move out to find it. This dungeon is really cool as well. Both groups are split from each other, but can only progress once the other flips a switch on the other side. It's nothing too strenuous, but I like the execution of the premise. Soon after, the group are reunited, but the treasure was a red herring, and we're still poor. Unfortunately, during this escapade, Nazrad has been attacked by Valois, with a character called Ramirez heading the assault. This admiral is notably familiar to Fina in particular. With no other choice, the group are taken into custody back to Valois, but are soon after assisted by the Crown Prince Enrique, who gives us not only our fourth character as Gilda soon after leaves, but also a badass state-of-the-art ship called the Delphinus, equipped with the finest weapons in the fleet. This ship easily breaks through the walls of the fortress and allows us to escape for a second time. The involvement of Enrique also opens the gates for a host of additions to the gameplay. The map expands in size, we get the ability to use captain orders, which are basically super moves when the spirit points gauge is maxed out, and we get to captain our own ship for the first time, along with finding a crew to man it. And this is the thing that Skies of Arcadia does better than many other JRPGs I've seen. A common issue with the genre is that games will often get worse the longer they go on, or at least that's the opinion. Tales of Arise with its final dungeon, Cold Steel 2's epilogue is a common draw of player ire, and Dragon Quest XI with Act 3 as a notable example, though I personally had no issue with that. The main argument here though is that some of these games go on for longer than they should, and they notably become more strained the further it goes on, whether that's in an attempt to meet a certain playtime marker or for design purposes, who knows. Skies of Arcadia is the exception here. It starts well with the odd bit of frustration at the early stages, but it only gets better as it progresses. It brings in so many new ways to traverse the world and enrich the experience. This idea of handing a ship to the player and then giving them the freedom to recruit characters from around the world that have been met previously in the journey is such an awesome addition to the game. It fits the theme of being a captain of a ship, and it also aids massively in the overall gameplay as crew members can often offer their own abilities for ship battles and the like. Later on, Skies of Arcadia even offers a method to outright avoid random encounters, which alleviates one of the biggest issues with the game. Anyway, now that we have our own ship, we also need a headquarters, and where better than the island that Vice was originally marooned on. Making their way back to the island and handing 100,000 gold to these guys so they can build it all up, Vice and the crew settle down where we discover the truth of Ramirez, that he is a Sylvite much like Fina and was sent down on the same mission as her, though why he defected she has no idea. They also make the decision to find the blue crystal next, which lies in the lands of the Far East Yaphetoma. One problem, the only way to get there is to go through the Dark Rift, an untraversable cloud front that no Skyfarer has ever come back from, a point made clear by the residents of Esperanza, the Cape Town that was built by Valois when they attempted to make contact with the Eastern Kingdom. This endeavour to open diplomatic channels is clearly a reference to the same real-world events that occurred during the Age of Discovery, where the Portuguese in particular attempted to make contact with countries like Japan and Korea, but were often rebuked by the peoples or repelled by the natural dangers of the sea. In the case of the natural obstacles, I imagine the Dark Rift was a reimagining of those dangers. Undeterred though, Vice and the crew state that they will succeed, and upon breaking through an armada led by 2nd Admiral of the Valoan fleet Gregorio, who has been sent to get Enrique back, we make our way to the Dark Rift. I'm gonna be real here, I hate this area, but that's not because of a design issue or that it was needlessly drawn out. I hated it because it was creepy as all heck. It's already a massive area, but then you add on the eerie music, the shipwrecks at every corner, the strange flora and fauna. It's just a place that you shouldn't be. Even going through from point to point in these strange tunnels was enough to give me chills. I was so happy that I only had to visit it once because any more would be too much. But in terms of design, well done Overworks, you creep me out. Thankfully we managed to get out and emerge at the east of the world, where it doesn't take us long to find the Yaffatomans. We're first apprehended by the Paradox brothers from Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is probably the easiest boss fight in the game, and then we dock in Yaffatoma proper.
By the way, I'm going to say it now, I don't think these guys are very smart. Reason being, they built a wall in the sky. I mean, how is that going to stop literal flying machines?
Eventually, the ruler of Yaffatoma, Mikado, states that the blue crystal is under the sacred mountain of Mount Kazai, so the next destination is set. The Mount Kazai dungeon was easily my least favourite one. It's the water dungeon of Skies of Arcadia, and all water dungeons suck by default. It's based around this central room where you're attempting to raise the water level in order to access the boss room. To do this, you go to the other rooms to the right and left and flip a few switches. The issue though, is that some of these switches require you to go underwater. Thankfully we were given a diving suit to make this possible, but as I traversed through this dungeon, I started to realise my biggest problem I had with Skies of Arcadia. It had been there since the beginning, but up until this point it had been tolerable. But Mount Kazai exaggerated it to the point where I just couldn't ignore it anymore.
This game is slow. And I don't mean slow in terms of story progression or anything like that. I mean it's slow in terms of its animations and mechanics that take a little bit too long to conclude.
This is easily my biggest issue with Skies of Arcadia. There are a lot of things within the game that take a noticeable amount of time to conclude. We've already touched on the moonfish and how annoying it is to hand them in one at a time, but there's also stuff like the diving suit in Mount Kazai that takes forever to move around. I get that it's meant to add a sense of realism and floatiness to simulate the idea of being underwater, but no, I hate it. Ship battles, which are really cool in the early stages, soon become frustrating because they take forever to conclude, purely because when you've set your turn in motion, you'll have to wait for all of the actions to conclude, and you often have these long drawn out sequences in between the turns as the ships just fly around each other. And the battles on the ground aren't much better, as the special moves in particular have unskippable animations tied to them that, yes, look cool, but not after seeing it for the 30th time. Pirate's Wrath, for example, Vice's final special move, takes 30 seconds to conclude. For reference, you'll be using it at least 3 times per boss battle. And that's going to segue quite nicely to the combat, which I'd like to revisit now. I've covered the mechanics and what you can do in this turn-based system, but I didn't actually say whether I liked it or not. You see, when I review a game, I can quite easily see the good and the bad things, and they go into their respective lists as I experience them. Skies of Arcadia's combat is the only time I've been so split on an element in a game that I've put it into its own mixed category, where the good and the bad effectively even out. It has plenty of mechanics, it has plenty of customization, it has some really neat ideas in there. But my main issues with it are firstly, the speed of the combat itself, and secondly, that the strategy for taking out bosses is pretty much always the same, no matter who you fight, which makes the customization in terms of what spells the characters learn kind of worthless. By the time I got Enrique, my strategy was always the same. Buff up Vice with a Glyph of Might, use Delta Shield of Ica to block nasty spells, use Justice Shield of Enrique to lower physical damage, and just guard with Fina because she's so fragile. Continue to do that with all the other characters and build up spirit points with Vice's special moves to finish the boss off. In some cases I might also use a Sanctum Crystal to top up the party's HP. And sure, you can play differently than this, but the issue is that a lot of these bosses have cheap mechanics that sort of force you down this route, like instant death moves or petrification that derails the whole fight and you have no way to recover. I think it's just a little overtuned, and though there's certainly satisfaction from preparing the group and getting everything set up, it did feel shallow. Thankfully, the speed of the battles wasn't too much of an issue later on. Since I was playing on an emulator, I could speed it up via the delimiting option for the FPS, and that effectively remedied the biggest issue I had with the game as a whole. Anyway, the boss is just a giant turtle. He can heal himself to full, but it's an easy fight nonetheless, and we get the water crystal. When we return to Yaffatoma, it turns out that the court advisors have been working in secret to betray the Emperor and colluding with the Valoran admirals. When the coup begins, Vice, Ica and everyone else make their way up high in the mountains where the exiled prince of Yaphetoma resides in an effort to counterattack. With his help we get the Delphinus back and also take out Blueheim the Blue Gigas, which represents the first time in these battles that we can outright destroy them without any gimmicks, mano al mano. With the coup thwarted, we return to our home base Crescent Island with a Yaphetoman secret in tow, that being the ability to fly in the higher and lower reaches of the sky. We're also greeted to another change. Crescent Island is now looking mighty fine as the money we spent before has been used by the construction crew to give us a proper base, and any crew members we found along the way can be seen around the island. Some will run shops that you can upgrade for a fee, others can redecorate the island, it feels like home. The ship has also been upgraded, allowing us to pick up the purple crystal in the frozen tundras of the north. This dungeon's pretty good, it's decidedly low key compared to the others, requiring the answering of some questions to proceed, and then a fairly linear dungeon follows. It's quite chill, if you will. However, unlike the other regions, this one has no Gigas fight, and our answers are found right near the bottom of the cave, where we find not only Drakmar but a wounded and dying Raknam. It turns out that Raknam had saved Drakmar during the Valoran attack, but had been wounded in the process. Drakmar, feeling a sense of duty, chose to stay with the Ark Whale until it passes away. And during this time, he discovers that he and the whale are very much alike, in that they are both alone and without purpose in the world. Drakmar lost his son and crew, but Raknam was originally a normal Ark Whale who was embedded with the purple crystal to become the purple Gigas. As such, as time passed, he was the only one to survive, while all his friends eventually perished. This parallel between the two of them allows Drakmar's story to come full circle. This is where I want to place a bit more focus on the characters of Skies of Arcadia. For all intents, they're fairly simple, intentionally I think. Overworks didn't want lead characters who were burdened with guilt or the like, they just wanted forward-thinking and positive characters to match the mood of the game. Despite that though, many of them are still brilliant. The core group of Ica, Vice and Fina grows and blossoms by the chemistry they share, while the characters who periodically join like Enrique or Drakmar have their own separate arc that progresses as the game continues. I think many of the developments are done well and they all act in believable ways relative to who they are as a person. It makes sense, for example, that Enrique would hold chivalry and morals above all else, as he is a person who wants the Valoran Empire to be redeemed. I also have to say that I like the approach taken for a fair few of the antagonists. While some of them are weasels that you wish the worst to, there are others that will act against their station based on their own morals. They're not just a bad guy for the sake of being the enemy. I wouldn't say they all maintain the same level of quality, but I think they were presented well enough during the playthrough. After retrieving the crystal, Drakmar states that he is leaving once again, as his seeming purpose to exist has now passed on. Upon returning to Crescent Island, we receive the last modification to the ship, the ability found from Yaphetoma to go above and below the clouds. This is the aforementioned mechanic that removes random encounters and makes traversal a breeze for the remainder of the game. It also allows the ship to access the Yellow Moon Crystal, which before was unobtainable due to the seal in the ground. Proceeding through the fissures under the earth, we eventually find the Yellow Gigas, which despite Fina's warnings turns out to be the easiest one so far. With the yellow crystal in hand, we now have all 5 crystals, and the final one is apparently at the Silver Shrine, which is where Fina originally came from. The only way to get there is to use the ship that Fina used back near the start of the game, the same ship that is now below the clouds due to being destroyed by the Imperial fleet. Thankfully, we're made aware that the Valoran Armada are building a ship to do just that, and that work is taking place in a base in the lower sky. We go there, find out that Galcian and thus the Armada are planning to betray the Empire, which raises the alarm for Enrique, and we steal the schematics, managing to escape thanks to the help of Gregorio, the Admiral from Esperanza, who gives his life for the Prince and by extension the whole crew. The ship gets outfitted with the engine to descend to the lower world, and we make our way to the Maelstrom in order to do so. Yet more creepy environments are waiting for us here. I still maintain the Dark Rift is the spawn of the devil, but the lower world isn't much better. Lightning, an ominous structure in the distance obscured by darkness, and a world of mud and debris greets us below. I will say though that despite mine not liking this place too much, I would have welcomed a bit more lore surrounding the lower world if it existed, maybe surrounding its history and the connection to the ancient civilizations, but that's just me. Either way, we fish up Fina's ship and get it fixed up for the journey to the Silver Shrine, returning to home base for a party. The celebrations are short-lived though, as the Armada led by Ramirez have found the base. They raze it to the ground, and Ramirez reveals one final truth, that the so-called Rains of Destruction that destroyed the world before was actually something that the Sylvites did themselves, and that a part of the Silver Crystal lies within all Sylvites. We lose a scripted fight, but are saved at the last minute by our pirate pals. With this truth in hand, Fina still wants to go to the shrine to question the elders and confirm the truth. Ship in hand, we make the jump out of the bounds of the world and arrive at the shrine, where we get zero gravity play and a shift to Resident Evil tank controls. There's not much danger here, it's just a leisurely walk to the council room. In short, they confirm what Fina was told. Humans are bad, we've given up on them, so we killed them. They also tell of the manufactured silver gigas, Zelos, which was the conduit to bring forth the rains, and it turns out that this is what Galcian wants. Speaking of Galcian, here he is, along with Ramirez, and they shank the Elder to take his crystal. They raze the city of Solstice, which is the structure we saw while descending to the lower world earlier, and lets loose the rains of destruction on Valois, virtually decimating the continent. Now, while I have praise for the characters in the majority, Galcian's a tough one for me, and that's because I'm not sure what his character stands for. He's shown before that he's a man of honour back during the schematics heist, as he clearly respected the actions of Gregorio after the man went against his orders. He states after the duel that he wants the soldiers to take his body back to Valois to take care of it, and that it has more value than their own lives. But now he's committing mass genocide on the entire continent. I think it would have been more consistent for Galcian's character to simply discard the corpse of Gregorio to show how callous he really is, and thus this action would fit right in with his character. But as a result of that show of affection earlier, or at least that's how I interpreted it, I'm not really sure what his angle is. With the Rains of Destruction used, the Valoan continent is virtually destroyed, and the stakes are now high, as it's clear that Galcian presents a threat to the whole world. Uniting under a single banner, the Sky Pirates wage war on Galcian's fleet, eventually killing him aboard his mothership. This action causes Ramirez, who had unwavering loyalty to Galcian, to go insane, but before he can call down the rains on the world, the remaining elders of the Silver Shrine use the structure itself as a meteor to stop the activation of Zelos, but also to break the shield surrounding Solstice. With the final obstacle out the way, the group infiltrate the ancient city, defeat a gauntlet of bosses including Ramirez, Zelos, and then a fusion of the two aboard the deck of the Delphinus, and the game ends on a particularly happy note as the world is saved. People are getting married, there are efforts to rebuild, Fina becomes a sky pirate to stay with her newfound friends, and we get a small epilogue related to each crew member as the credits roll.
And so ends my time with Skies of Arcadia. I'm very impressed. I mean, the likelihood was that the game was going to be good anyway, but I didn't expect it to hold up as well as it did.
Has it aged perfectly? No, I wouldn't say that. There are certainly areas in the game that would frustrate players of modern JRPGs. The camera is suboptimal, the random encounter rate is high, and the game's overall progression is slow, as if by design. Even so, I would recommend Skies of Arcadia to anyone, and would conclude that it is a game that all JRPG fans should try at least once. What it lacks in convenience, it makes up for in its charm and grounded yet optimistic atmosphere. Very few games can replicate the sense of liberty and freedom that Skies of Arcadia effortlessly presents, very few games have such simple yet likeable characters, and very few games have the accolade of getting better as the hours pass by. I can only imagine how a 7-year-old me would have felt if I played this game back in the year 2000. I've no doubt I would have been binging it, much like I did Sonic Adventure and Soul Calibur. I would be drawn into this world that Overworks were able to realise for hours on end. Even now in my 30s, and being a person who prefers modern games, I'm still enamoured with what it was able to do. In many ways, I feel it's a game that bridges the gap between what JRPGs used to be in that 16-bit era, and what they would eventually become come those modern iterations. It had the charm and simplicity of a game from that golden age, but also started to push the boundaries more to show what the genre was capable of in the not too distant future.
Like I say, Skies of Arcadia is a must-play for any JRPG fan. It may not have aged perfectly, as many older games struggle to do, but despite that, even 2 decades later, it certainly does a lot right too.
Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe for more JRPG content, and consider joining my Patreon if you're interested. Peace.